Hey everyone, welcome to Yorktown, Yorktown with me, Supervisor Lachterman. Today we have our guest, John Tegeter. John is our Director of Planning in the town of Yorktown, and we're going to talk a little bit about the processes that are involved in building in Yorktown. How are you today, John?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you being here. So, John, there is quite a bit involved in trying to build something in any town, not just Yorktown. Could you explain a little bit about the process?
Sure. Well, it is a complicated process to start out with. So there are a number of laws that govern how we do things in terms of getting things to be able to be built and approved. There are local laws, our own laws. Most of that is following what's called enabling legislation from the state. So that's a set of laws as well. There's also other laws that come into play, such as the State Environmental Quality Review Act. We call it SECRA, which is a law that governs how you look at things and how you interact with other agencies that are necessary to the process, and also the public. And that is really an environmental law. But don't think of it only as environmental in the sense of what happens to the natural environment. It's also the built environment. So it looks at and allows everyone to look at together how the proposed project will impact not only the built environment and the human life, but also the natural environment. So the process is basically that a prospective, whether it be a site plan or a subdivision, needs to make an application to the proper department. My department handles subdivisions and commercial site plans. You make an application, which we help you go through and fill out correctly. And there are some papers that you need to give us along with that package. And from there, it starts moving through the process. And the process can be over the course of many months, given the complexity that I alluded to a little bit before. But basically, you go to the planning board and over time, explain the project, and the project evolves to where it is reducing the impacts and basically ends up being the best situation for Yorktown, whether it be a subdivision or a commercial site plan. And when I say Yorktown, I mean the people that live around it, and all of the people of Yorktown that need to move by it or interact with it. At some point in the process, getting towards the end of the process, you need to do a public hearing. That's a requirement both of state law and of the SECRA law. And that all of the public is invited to that to comment and give testimony as to how they understand the project and what they believe its negative impacts may be, what they believe its positive impacts may be.
So can we stop there a second without
Sure.
throwing you off? So there are a couple of things I want to help define for the people watching. We spoke about subdivisions, and we spoke about commercial property.
Right.
We did not speak about residential property. So residential, in definition, I believe, is a single or two-family home?
Well, subdivisions can make properties that will house single-family or two-family homes, correct. But if you're speaking about residential, oftentimes you're talking about a single-family home. That's the predominant land use in Yorktown, or two-family homes. Also think of the multifamily, which is three or more.
Right. So if I'm building my own house on an empty lot, I would not go to planning. I would go to the building department, correct?
Typically, you'll go right to the building department, and provided that the lot was created through a process that qualifies it as a building lot. So it has to be recorded in the county land office as having gone through that process, so that it is a legal building lot. Some properties are created by deed or some other type of transfer and are not yet building lots. So that's just a cautionary measure that you have to be aware of.
Fantastic. So now we're speaking about, with public hearings, more commercial and a subdivision that would affect a neighborhood, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So I don't know if you'd like to carry on from there.
Sure. So the public hearing is usually one night. Oftentimes it can go more than a single night if there are a lot of comments that the board wants to address or look further into. Once the public hearing is closed, the board will again consider all the comments that it's heard during the public hearing, and it will begin to formulate its decision. It will discuss the project of course, at a meeting, some of the things that the board has seen or heard through the public comment or through the application itself, and they will start to hone in on what the decision should be, whether it's a denial or an approval, or in most instances, an approval with certain conditions.
So as our director of planning, you're also a member of our planning board. What are some of the things that you look at for approval of a project?
Just quick clarification, I'm not a voting member.
Okay.
Certainly not. But we are an integral part of the planning board in that we provide them with all of the necessary information that they need, and also, our professional advice. But the things that we look for that are needed are this is where it gets pretty subjective, but we're always looking to maintain and or enhance the quality of life in Yorktown. So we will look at things like how the site and the building address the street in terms of its architecture and its aesthetic quality, whether or not it is connected to the rest of, in the case of a commercial site plan, to the rest of the commercial area properly with, for instance, pedestrian amenities such as sidewalks or other walkways. We need to make sure that the vehicular access is safe and efficient, that getting in and out of the site with a vehicle is done in a way that people can negotiate safely, and that it doesn't produce instances in which there is high likelihood of some vehicular accidents or such. We look for landscaping to a level that is attractive, so that the sites are not barren and that they are actually enhanced properly. The landscaping also has environmental benefit. Some trees may be planted, which of course have an environmental benefit. We look for other instances that are more to the environmental, meaning the natural environmental side of things, such as stormwater. We have to make sure that the stormwater, now that there will be impervious surfaces, which is like asphalt and structures and so forth, all of that water needs to be handled, and it needs to be done in a way that it does not cause flooding, and that it is maintained in as a clean state as possible. So we have to work with our engineering department on that. They're an integral part of that. Most of Yorktown, about 80 to 85% of Yorktown, is in the New York City watershed. So that agency also looks at that, and they will also do their own separate approval once the planning board is done with that. So there's a lot of scrutiny in that regard. We also look for other natural environmental features that to be preserved or enhanced, such as trees and tree removal. So we have a tree law that we have to comply with, which requires a tree permit, but also any trees that you are taking down, there needs to be certain mitigation for the loss of those trees and the loss of the forest. That takes up a lot of the review process, because that's a difficult situation to make sure you do properly.
Now, if I take down a dead tree in my yard, does that have to be mitigated?
No, that you do not need a permit, nor do you need to mitigate for dead trees or diseased trees. The best thing to do in that regard is document it. Make sure you have a picture of the dead tree, or a tree arborist come out and say this is a diseased tree and should come down, and just have that on record in case somebody calls up and complains about a tree that was taken down without a permit. So.
Sure. Okay. So we spoke a little bit about the process. Who's involved, per se, like with the planning board?
A lot of people. a lot of agencies. So as I said, in terms of governmental agencies, most of the departments in the town are involved on some level. So the engineering department is very involved. So is the building department, because they are more technical departments. Our assessor department is involved because they are interested in the tax assessment and how it will be assessed, and we need that information up front. They also need to make sure that the property, for instance, in a subdivision, when it gets subdivided, that those lots are done in the proper way for them to actually record them properly in their assessment rolls, and then can do a proper assessment when the time comes. Our Parks Department and Recreation Department are also involved. In terms of subdivisions, there is a requirement to make sure that the recreational needs of the towns are always met, and that some of these projects may have an impact on those services. So those folks are always involved as well. Our refuse and recycling department is involved in that they will be picking up the garbage oftentimes, and so they need to know how they're going to get in there, how they're going to pick it up, in what containers or enclosures there will be, and how they're oriented. So a lot of departments in the town are involved. Our highway department's fully involved because they do connect to our streets. They are interested in how they connect, in the manner that they connect, where they connect. That department will also issue its own separate street opening permit, which they call it, which is making the curb cut in the new road onto our existing street. The highway department will eventually become, in the case of a subdivision or what's going to become a public road, they will become the keepers of that road. They'll be doing the snow plowing, the maintaining. They will be repaving it from time to time. So most of our departments are involved.
Yep, sewer and water as well. With
sewer and water as well, right.
So the one town, the one department I'm not hearing about per se is the town board. So I think that one of the biggest questions that we get is, what is a town board doing on approving this project or that project? And I know with some projects we do have lead agency and we have some things that we discuss, but for the most part, planning is pretty autonomous per se from the town board.
The planning board is autonomous from the town board and has approval authority over the things that they have been designated to have approval authority over, which is in large measure the subdivisions and the commercial site plans, basically the land use approvals. They also have some authority and approval authority over certain special permits, as does the town board and as does the zoning board. So those permits, our special permits, are split up among those three boards, so that you'll see the town board do certain. In fact, not only will you see them, but you'll be doing them. Certain special permits, which are basically different types of land uses that have regulations that are peculiar to that land use. So they need their own set of regulations. The town board, you will see them involved in the rezonings when there is either a rezoning that the town board wants to do, a larger area rezoning, or on occasion certain applicants or owners will come in and they will request a rezoning, and in that case that is the town board's authority to do so. That looks just like a land use approval, because under those you really have to look at that particular applicant's proposed land use to understand whether or not you should make the decision to rezone it. So you'll be talking a lot about land use issues during those things, so it looks similar or the same.
And we have had a few of those. So.
You've had a few of those. So the town board is not involved as an approval authority when the planning board is doing the things that they are under the law supposed to approve. They will have certain responsibilities, such as the other departments and other agencies do. For instance, if there's a subdivision and there is going to be a public road, at some point towards the end of the process, the town board will have to actually accept ownership of that deed to take over that road And by doing so, they are not just taking the ownership, but, taking the responsibility, the fiscal responsibility of that piece of property and the improvements there too. So,
Very good. You said something earlier about permitted use. Maybe for our audience, we could explain how you would find a permitted use for a piece of property.
Sure. So our zoning code, which is, by the way, Chapter 300 in our town code, and you can find that online as a link from our website. The zoning code lists all of our zones, our land use zones. There's where we have a zoning map, so you can find, for instance, if you want to find where your property is and what zone it's in, you can find that fairly easily. And each zone has its own allowed and permitted uses. So in a single-family residential use, for instance, you can do single-family houses. There are also other things that you can do under special permits, and they have different approval requirements and maybe a different approval board in order to do them. In the commercial zones, we have, for instance, we have 4 basic commercial retail zones. We have a zone that is basically a mall zone that the JV Mall is in. We have commercial recreational zones. We have a country commercial zone. Those all differ somewhat from one another. We have light industrial zones where you would expect to find a little bit more intense use that has some impacts that you don't associate with, say, a deli and a hair salon and a nail salon and a pizza shop.
Sure.
So those in the zoning code, it's basically Chapter 300. It's in the beginning. It's Section 21. It lists all those zones and the permitted uses therein. If you have a use that you would like to do in the particular zone that you happen to be in and you don't find it listed there, it's more than likely that it's not allowed in the zone. So in order to be allowed, typically the rule of thumb is that they are explicitly listed as permitted.
So it sounds like a heck of a lot of knowledge. How many years have you been doing this for our town?
26.
26.
26 wonderful years.
26 wonderful, glorious years. Yes.
Glorious years.
So I'm coming to town, and I have never been to Yorktown, and I want to build something. Where can I go for help?
A lot of places. Of course, you can come to my department. A lot of people don't know really what the planning department does, but we will always help you. But there's also the building department and the engineering department. They are a little bit more well known to a lot of people. You can ask questions of them, and they will set you in the right direction. Sometimes the right direction is that you got to get to my department to get to the planning board. Other times it's not. Depending on what you want to do, it may be a permit from the engineering department for whatever reason. There's permits that they do too, particularly natural environmental type permits, such as stormwater or wetland permits. So any of those 3 departments can certainly set you in the right direction. I think even if you sauntered into the town hall and asked of the clerk or even the tax collector, which is the first 2 windows you might get to, I'm sure that you would get some good help.
Very good. Now, you sort of spoke about the planning and the ideas. We were talking about how things work and how they work for the town. Excuse me. What type of guideline do we have that's available for our planning department? Is there some type of a study, something that you're able to look at that's gone on in the past?
That we look to be guided by? Yeah, there's several. Of course, we have the laws we need to be guided by, which I mentioned before. We also have a comprehensive plan, or also sort of known as or used to be known as a master plan for the town that the town board has adopted. The last one was adopted in 2010, I think. But that is a plan that looks at a lot of different aspects of the town, including land development. It also looks at environmental features and preservation and protection. It looks at economic development. It looks at historic preservation and enhancement. It looks at parks and recreation provision and services. So it looks at a lot of things. And it provides a lot of policies and goals that guide us in all those aspects and others. So we, for instance, if someone comes in, as an example, if someone comes in and wants to do a rezone, one of the things is to look to see what's in the comprehensive plan, either for that property or in that area, to see that that proposed land use is either supported properly. If it's not supported, then the town board, in consideration, has to also look at the comprehensive plan and make some decisions as to why they would possibly, deviate slightly from that plan. So we do have some other studies that have been done in the past that we always tend to look at. We have a sign ordinance manual, which has some design guidelines in it. We have some other laws, such as the wetland law and the tree law, which we have to follow. We have had some more targeted plans that we've looked at in the past. Some of them are old, but nevertheless have good information in them. One goes back decades, but I still think it has a lot of pertinent things in it. It's called the Northeast Corridor Plan, which is basically up in the Jefferson Valley area. So some of the things that we hope to see for that area really are in that plan from many, many years ago. So a lot of things that we follow as well.
So I know that we 3 years ago, I believe, 3.5 years ago, adopted a district overlay plan.
Correct.
And that sort of gives you a little bit of flexibility that's not normally there. I know that I've heard some criticism of it, but I know that I also know that the state and the Business Council of Westchester both felt that this was landmark legislation that really helps you to be able to plan
Yes.
in the town. So what are your feelings about the overlay district?
I do feel it was landmark legislation in that it is, I think, the first instance, at least for us here in Yorktown, that we have adopted zoning or some zoning guides that are flexible so that the town board and the planning board can look at certain uses that come in and say that this is the type of thing that's needed and is not tripped up by Euclidean type zoning, which is our typical zoning codes, which oftentimes can be somewhat rigid and not follow some of the trends that are happening. So the overlay district, and it's not something that hasn't been talked about in other parts of the country or even here in New York. It's talked about quite a bit. It is in, other municipalities and areas have similar laws. But basically what it does, it allows the town board and the planning board to look very flexibly at producing site plans, commercial site plans that have flexibility, that can really bring the highest and best use to the area in what is really difficult real estate times. I mean, the real estate trends in the country are very fluid right now. There's been talk about the Amazon effect, the needs and desires of the millennial generation, transfer of development rights, and transit-oriented development. So there's a lot of things that are not fitting into those neat boxes any longer, and this legislation, in my view, gives the flexibility and a little bit of elbow room to be able to make those, to produce site plans that really fit well for the town.
It's funny because you're talking about that, and I'm thinking, you just mentioned the master plan or the comprehensive plan, which was basically legislated 14 years ago. And I'm thinking of how much that changed, but I believe it took 10 years in study to complete that.
It did.
So it would be like the equivalent of walking around with a phone from 4 years ago, I guess,
Right, yeah.
today, as to when you look at that. So there have been quite a few changes that have progressed, not so much in our code, but in the world.
In the world, for sure. Yeah, the comprehensive plan was started in the early 2000s. It took 10 years, in part because it didn't, some of the zoning was challenged, so we had to redo some things, which is not unusual, and essentially, oftentimes you'll end up with a better product. But it's true that now, 14 years later from its original adoption, and 20-something years later, 21, 22, from its inception, that some things have changed. I will say that a lot in that plan is still quite valid. In fact, it does talk about overlay zones and did suggest overlay zones. And it recommended that the town look at the potential for overlay zones periodically, which I think gave rise to what we did with this overlay zone that we adopted here a few years ago. It certainly was support for it. So in that way, I think it was pretty forward-looking. But of course, some other things that it was addressing have since passed into history and are not quite as valid as they once were. So.
Great.
But it's supposed to be a fluid document, which I believe that it is.
Yeah, I think it has been. I think it's withstood the test of time and been able to adopt as needed. So, that's definitely big pluses for that plan. So, and I'm going to change directions a little bit, and I'm going to talk about people coming in, applicants coming in. If there's a project that looks like a good project, other than like proper licensing and people who are able to do the project, do we look at the so and so brought this in, we shouldn't do anything because we don't like him, or because I've heard things about that, and vice versa. Oh, this is someone that we really like, so we should push this. Or is the planning board, and I know this is sort of a stupid softball question, but I don't think everyone understands, what are the parameters that the planning board looks at? How do they make their decisions? And, is it a personalized process, or is it a, more of a scientific?
It's clearly more of a scientific kind of boring approach that we have to take. So there's no points for whether you're liked or not, or who you are, or where you're from. The points add up from what's on the page of showing what the site plan is. They add up from compliance with the laws that we have to comply with. Some projects may, at first blush, look like a fairly admirable project, but they cannot really get there once you dig into them, because they can't comply well enough with the law, with our laws, or with the quality of life, more subjective view that the planning board may be looking for. So no, it is not anything like that. In fact, the planning board is fairly insulated from that kind of thing, and I'm sure that they make some folks feel unloved sometimes because they go through the motions that they're supposed to under the law. There's really no way around that. If you don't, you have a site plan application file that is flawed. And if someone is able to bring a lawsuit against it, they will likely win if the planning board hasn't done the due diligence and of looking at all the things that they need to look at environmentally, natural environment through all of our laws, and the impacts to the human built environment. They have to look at all those things. It's their duty to do so under the law. And if you want to spend time reading some of the land use lawsuits that happen here in New York and around the country, you'll find a lot of that. Oftentimes, if something wasn't looked at properly, it goes right back and is not, it is denied by the courts because they didn't look at what they were supposed to under the law in order to protect the health and safety and welfare of the public.
I know there are a few times that the town of Yorktown has been involved in those, and those I believe are called Article 78s for those people that haven't heard that. And I think we've been fairly successful in our Article 78s, based on the job that our planning board does. Our planning board chair, Rich, how many years has he been on the planning board?
He's got to be probably 12 or 14 years, I think. I don't have that exact number, but
All right, but a while. And
he's
I
been
know-
there a while.
Yeah,
yes.
I know a lot of our people have.
Yeah.
Bill LaScala is also. So
And yeah, and-
Aaron Bach, who was actually a town supervisor at one point.
Yeah, they all have good experience. So, Rich has experience in government and in the development end of things. Bill LaScala was a builder for a long time. Aaron was also in government and knows, the things that you need to do. So they have good experience, and I think right now there's a good mix on the board, and that they do quite well in, fairly reviewing plans and interacting with one another to come out with really what's the best site plan that you can get on any particular piece of property.
Maybe we should double their salaries.
We should, I think so.
Yes.
That would be in order.
For those of you who don't know, our planning board, as all of our town boards, other than the actual town board, are volunteer positions.
Yes.
So no one gets paid. So doubling his salary is quite the generous gesture.
Yes. You can triple.
Could triple it too. There you go. So, John, what are some of the pitfalls that you find people have with site planning when they're putting their projects together?
Well, they can be pretty varied. I think the first pitfall is not understanding how the laws are applied in Yorktown. So, in other words, we have all these sections of the law that we have to apply. For instance, the wetland law, stormwater law. We have the tree law, tree preservation law. We also have the land development laws and the zoning code. So that's just the 5 right there. How those interact and play out in the site plan is probably oftentimes unknown by some people that might be making application. I think not understanding, and this is a more difficult one, and I wouldn't really expect many people to know it or understand it, is how the town has developed and what they might really expect to see in certain areas of town. That's something that I don't think will jump out at you across the pages of the zoning code or even the land development code. You might start to get a little bit of inkling about that if you read the comprehensive plan. So I think those are pitfalls, but they don't often remain pitfalls. I think we do our best to try to explain at the very outset to any potential applicant what the lay of the land will look like, what the process will look like, to be prepared, and some of the things that planning boards and other boards will be, concerned with on any given particular piece of property.
So I have my site plan, I'm building, and I realize something doesn't work, and it doesn't fit in with the site plan. What do I do?
Well, you'll get feedback from the planning board that it's not looking as though this is working quite well, and then I think you need to, huddle with your engineer and your architect to move some things around if it's possible to do so, and try to redesign it possibly. Oftentimes it's not a wholesale redesign. Oftentimes it's really just what is more minor modifications, but those minor modifications can really get you to where it's the best site plan. So it's really, I think, a matter of taking what the planning board is saying seriously and listening intently, and those comments can really get you a long way, even though they may take not much different lines on the paper, so to speak. So if it doesn't work, there's 2 things really. It's try a redesign. It could be making something a little smaller and something a little larger, or the project's not right. And I think that will become clear before you're too far into the process.
Very good. You did mention working with different agencies.
Yeah.
What agencies in particular have the most? I think you mentioned DEC already because of our watershed
DEP.
DEP.
Yes, New York City Department of Environmental Protection. We call them DEP. So if you hear that jargon, that's who it refers to. When we refer to DEC, that's New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So if you hear DEC, that's who we're referring to. And
ACOE.
ACOE, which is Advisory Commission. No, that's the Army Corps of Engineers.
There you go.
Yes, we interact with them.
What does the Army Corps of Engineers do? We're not in a battle here.
No, well, they're engineers, so that's a particular set of thought, people with particular set of thought processes. Very intelligent people. They are responsible for permits where there is impact to waters, navigable waters of the United States. That's the jargon. That basically has come to mean almost all wetlands that are of a certain size. So they have to give permits for a lot of projects here. Our interaction with them, as with many agencies, is, it's not face-to-face. We send them information. Sometimes they send us information back. And at some point, the applicant has to obtain their permit from those agencies, such as the Army Corps of Engineers or DEP. DEP, they do a fairly involved approval for stormwater because they are interested in water quality in the watershed, since this is in the drinking watershed of New York City. So those approvals can be pretty involved, and those come back to us to make sure that our approval is in comportment with what their approval has now come to be or evolved to be. If it's not, sometimes we have to amend our approval to take that into account, those changes. New York State DEC also gives out wetland permits and other environmental permits that are sometimes required if there's a state wetland involved. Certain wetlands they won't give permits for, depending on the quality of it, or you have much more requirements and conditions in order to obtain that permit. Again, there is not often face-to-face interaction, but certainly correspondence that goes between the two. We also have to interact with other local boards. We interact with county planning board and the county planning department, because certain instances we have to, by law, tell them what the project is and show them what the project is, and they comment on it. There is a county master plan that they always hold up these proposals against and comment on those. So there's a lot of agencies.
Board of Health also.
The Board of Health, they have to, for instance, with subdivisions, they have to approve all of those lots so that they can handle their wastewater properly, whether it be through a sewer connection or septics. So they're involved as well. That's a county office.
Now, you mentioned stormwater before. So we have a stormwater project going on right now, which falls under the MS4. I know that's more of an engineering thing, but this is on the on 35 as Ridge and Broad Street, like in between Ridge and Broad as they come out, and it's on the south side of the road. What exactly, for everyone at home, is an MS4 project?
MS4 project is, it's the 4 is that there's, sanitary sewer and stormwater, so it's municipal sanitary and sewer water systems. So that's what that relates to. That comes down, it's really state requirements coming from DEC. We have requirements in terms of water quality to uphold here that the state imposes on us. That project comes from an organization that is a municipal organization that has access to money that comes from, in part, I think, believe it or not, DEP and some state money to do water quality projects. So it's really attempting to improve the overall water quality in the area, in the town, and in the region. So those projects are larger sort of regional type efforts that are happening in many municipalities, not just, you won't just see those projects here, so.
So they're looking to take the phosphates out of the water.
Yes.
And as you pointed out, it's a state, state mandate. Of course, they give us all the money for the mandates,
Oh,
right?
sure, yes.
Yeah. So,
Rarely.
But, so no, it's something that we'll have to keep up on for the future, but that's sort of a little high level of
Yes.
what they do, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, my description was very high level and probably poor. There's a lot of more information on it that engineers and other environmentally minded folks are much more involved in than I am. So if you want some more information, I can certainly turn anybody to some of those folks.
I'm sure they're banging their head on the tables right now trying
yeah.
to get through it, so that's you don't really need to. But I did think a lot of people would mention that, and really from the pavement comes the runoff with all the oils and whatever that are leaked out of automobiles.
Sure.
And this cleans it up before it gets into the wetland for water safety and purity. You also mentioned earlier, we were talking about laws, and you talked about state law and local home rule law. Are we allowed to say, you know what, the state's too rough on that, we're going to go easier on our law, and we're going to do a home law that's easier than the state?
No.
No.
No, we can be more restrictive because we may care more about our town than all of New York State cares about it, but
Right.
we cannot be less restrictive than the state. The state has set forth rules that we have to follow, and much of our law, you will find, echoes what is in those enabling statutes. So it really hails from them, and they call it enabling legislation, as I understand it, because it enables us to do our home rule. But you can't just do what you want.
Right. I have heard that question in the past, which is why I thought it would be a good topic to bring up.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I know our wetlands laws are more restrictive than the state, where there are three definitive things that make up what a wetland is, with your water, your hydration, your soil, and your plant life, your fauna. And the state requires two of the three to be present to be a wetland, where Yorktown only requires one of the three, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. The state may be, yes, the state is probably two, yeah.
Yeah, I believe.
But if one is present, for Yorktown, it's a wetland.
Right.
So you'll find the boundaries of wetland, the limit of a wetland, can differ from what the state requires, and the wetland may be larger because our law requires it to be larger. Sometimes there's a little bit of differing there on the same wetland.
So I guess a question that I would have off of that, you mentioned earlier that, let me get it right, I think it was DEC is responsible for the wetlands. If the state totally owns a property that wetland is on, and the DEC does the permitting for it, do they follow our wetland rule, or is that?
Well, they would be they should follow our law because it's nonetheless a law.
Gotcha.
Their laws are, like I said, different from ours. I think the intent at protection is the same, but they have different thresholds. Our thresholds are lower, as you said.
Okay.
But I believe that that we would ask them to follow our laws if that were the case.
Very good. What have we missed about the integral important part of planning within our town?
Excuse me. Well, I thought maybe there's an aspect of public participation that might be talked about a little bit more in depth. I know I mentioned public hearings, but the public can really be involved to the greatest extent that they wish to. As soon as they know about a project, they can certainly come and inquire about it. They can ask for information. We're happy to give them all the information that they are asking for if we, in fact, have it. We will also be happy to explain things that may be a little cloudy, because a lot of it's hard to understand is somewhat esoteric knowledge, but you have to be proactive in that. So if you hear about a project, you can give a call. No one is going to reach out to you until really some of the hearings are scheduled. So that is, maybe, I don't want to call it a downfall, but a restriction in the process that the general public needs to just be a little bit more proactive if they have some interest in any particular project.
How can they find out about the upcoming schedule? And when does the planning board meet?
Planning board meets generally twice a month. Sometimes it's once a month, for instance, in July and August. Second and fourth Mondays. You can look on our website, and all of the pending projects are posted there. Agendas are posted and publicly posted. You can call and ask prior to an agenda coming out if a particular project is likely to be on the next coming agenda. But certainly our website has a whole lot of information about what is being looked at, what is being reviewed in terms of the agendas, which, by the way, you can sign up to have sent to you automatically, which is on the website, the sign up. But the projects and a lot of the information and documents and the applications are on the website for you to review. And once you review them, if you have questions, you can call the office.
Very good. Now, where is the office if I wanted to come by and knock on the door and give a visit?
I really have to give out this information? It is...
I think it is a public office.
It is a public office, yes. It's no secret. It's in the Albert A. Capellini Community and Cultural Center, which is, we call it we used to call it the YCC, now we call it the AACCC.
Or the old sixth grade school.
The old sixth grade school, it's been called. So it's the old school building on Commerce Street, right in the middle of Yorktown Heights.
1974.
1974, right at the corner of Veterans Road. We are up on the top floor, which is floor 2, although there are 3 floors there. The bottom floor is the lower level, and we are in room 222. Our telephone number is on the website. It's available there. So are our emails. You can email us, call us, you can stop by. We will answer any question that we're able to answer.
And the website is yorktownny.org for now.
Yes.
It will be eventually changing to a .gov.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So we're working on that, waiting for the approvals to come through. And yes, very easy to reach. And I will say I find you to be a wealth of information in your entire department.
Yeah, thank you.
Very often reaching out just for clarification and to make sure that I have all my ducks in a row for a meeting.
That's what we're here for.
Yes. Anything else there, Mr. Tegeter?
No, I don't think so. There's much more.
Well,
it's a multi-layered process, but
absolutely. So
you can't really talk about it in great detail in one sitting.
I agree wholeheartedly. Just a little finalization from my point of view. I've built my project. What happens after that? How do you ensure I did what I was supposed to do?
Well, for instance, if it's a commercial site plan, for instance, you would get a planning board approval for the commercial site plan, and you would then get your building permit for the building itself and some other structures on the site. During that time, there will be inspections by the building department and the engineering department, and on occasion, our department, the planning department. At the time, if we see something that's not going right, of course, we'll inform the developer or the builder. At some point, you need to get a certificate of occupancy to occupy the building legally, or the buildings legally. At that point, the departments will again go out and inspect the properties to see that they are conforming to the site plans, all of the other permits, such as a stormwater permit. Of course, the building department is always out there more than anybody, making sure the building was done correctly, and also, site plan amenities and other structures. So we would let you know prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy if you've done it correctly. If there's something missing or hasn't been done correctly, you can have the opportunity to correct it right there immediately, and then get the C of O, which is the certificate of occupancy. There's a way to do it in that we often will take a bond, which can be in the form of cash or other surety, that guarantees that that will be done at a later date, and then get your certificate of occupancy, occupy the building, get on your feet, and then when the season is right, let's say, for instance, to plant something, get it planted, call us, we'll go down, the bond is released, and everything should be per approval. After the fact, after you've been on your site for 5, 6, 10 years or whatever it is, those site plan amenities still need to be maintained in the form that they were approved. If they aren't, you can, possibly get a visit from one of us and have a discussion that you need to either get that rectified and get it back up to speed and do it correctly again, or, a whole host of things could have happened. And that's another process that happens. It's not that common, but that's one thing that can happen. And that's because the site plans and the buildings need to be maintained in a manner that they were approved, so, in order to perform properly.
Very good. All right, I think that you have given us a tremendous amount of information to digest.
Yes.
I do appreciate it, and I think we'll sign off now, and just remember Yorktown, that your town is Yorktown. This is Supervisor Ed Lachterman, thanking our Director of Planning, John Tegeter, and everyone for tuning in, and thanks to our executive producer in the back, Tom Ciangelo. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and anytime you have a question, please feel free to reach out to Town Hall, any of the departments. We could help get you where you need to go, and it's all about working for the people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great evening, all.